Hello, I'm Matteo, the Chief Mobile Opinionist, here at Tech Travel Geeks, and this is the Tech Travel Geeks side-by-side comparison between the POCO M3 smartphone and the Xiaomi Redmi 9, both devices that are priced around about the £150 sterling price range and which offer amazing value for money. If you don't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube. Right then, so we've come to the point of our review of the POCO M3, where we're comfortable enough being able to compare it side by side to the Redmi 9, which we have already completed our long-term review of. If you haven't already, please do check out that long-term review of the Redmi 9. The POCO M3 was released a few months later. It was actually released, in this case, at the end of November, beginning of December, and offers similar value in terms of what it delivers, but differs a bit in terms of its specifications and its strong points. So we'll walk you through the two devices side by side and explain the similarities and differences. Now let's start off with the hardware itself. Both devices are unapologetically plastic, whereas the Redmi 9 has Xiaomi's textured back finish, which is actually quite pleasant, doesn't catch fingerprints, and is not slippy at all. The POCO M3 goes for a very 2014-2015 style with what is essentially pleather. It's plastic with a dimpled finish, textured finish that's a bit like plastic leather, but hard plastic. So it has, similar to the Redmi 9, low fingerprint magnet scoring, as well as being quite durable, and it won't show off many scratches because of that textured finish. It's also less slippy, so it's good to see that it's not an afterthought. They've actually thought about the materials and how they're going to do this. It's a nice durable back. Now obviously in the design there's one thing that stands out. The branding, the POCO branding, is not subtle at all. So you have big capital POCO in an extra large panel that's on the top of the back of the phone. Now this is a bit of a novel design. It's mostly aesthetic. I'm not sure if there are any antenna functionalities built in there, but I sincerely doubt it. I think this is just a design cue to make that POCO branding stand out. And you have the camera module in the top left-hand side of the device with 3 cameras there. We'll go over that in a bit more detail later. Whereas on the Redmi 9, we go for a quite more traditional or simple design with a camera module in the middle with 3 cameras down the middle and a fingerprint scanner, and the 4th camera and flash at the back as well. So it's very, very straightforward. And the Redmi branding is there, but it's much more subtle. It's not shouting at you like the POCO one is. So on the back of the design and the overall construction, they're both plastic smartphones with big touchscreen LCDs at the front. We'll talk about the screens in a bit more detail, but as I mentioned, the Redmi 9 has its fingerprint scanner on the middle of the back, which is quite easy to find. It's quite tactile, easy way to get to it. I quite enjoy that, though I have to say that it being in the same module as the camera, it's easy to misplace your finger and maybe cover up one of the camera units. But apart from that, you have a nice big screen at the front. In this case, it's a 6.53-inch full high definition plus display, and you have your power on button and volume rocker on the right-hand side of the device. Whereas the POCO M3 doesn't have its fingerprint scanner on the back of the device. That's at the side in the power button, similar to what we've seen on other smartphones, like the POCO X3 NFC, like the Redmi Note 9S, and the Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro 5G. So this is Xiaomi's new sort of design paradigm, which was quite popular in 2020. Some people really do prefer that fingerprint scanner in the power button at the side of the phone. It really does make it easy to get to, and it's a bit different. and just above that power button you have the volume rocker too. So this is the main difference in hardware. There is another slight one. So at the top of the phone, the Redmi 9, the grey one, has its microphone hole and an infrared blaster, a feature we quite enjoy using here at Tech Travel Geeks. Whereas the POCO M3 has microphone hole, infrared blaster, and its courage port. That's the 3.5mm audio jack. So that's at the top on the POCO M3. Whereas if we flip the devices around, you can see that at the bottom, the Redmi 9 has everything there. It has the courage port, microphone holes, USB Type-C, and speaker port, whereas the POCO M3 just has its microphone hole and USB Type-C and speaker grill. So overall, pretty straightforward. The left-hand side of the device is pretty bare, and that's it. Now, obviously, I've just mentioned the screen to the Redmi 9. Essentially, it is the same as the screen we have on the POCO M3 smartphone. They're both full high-definition displays. They're both the same resolution. In this case, they are 6.53 inches in size, and they're both 1080 at the bottom by 2340. And they're both 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So really nothing in it. They're essentially the same displays. Now, these two displays have a notch at the top. This is a teardrop notch, and that teardrop notch is home to two very different cameras here. So they are technically, in this case, they are technically 8 megapixel units, but in my experience, the POCO M3 takes better pictures. Now, there are 8 megapixel, which are f/2 for the Redmi 9 and f/2.1 for the POCO M3. There is a slight difference in terms of how much light they can let in, but in day-to-day use, I found the POCO M3 to be slightly better. That's probably down to the difference in software, because the POCO M3 is already running on MIUI 12, so the latest version of Android from Xiaomi, which is MIUI 12. Whereas the Redmi 9 is still running on MIUI 11. So in the UK, we still haven't had the update on the Redmi 9 to MIUI 12, but we are told that this is coming soon. So in terms of selfie cameras, the hardware is very similar, but differs slightly, but we can see the difference in terms of software. We'll have to revisit this statement once we do get MIUI 12 on the Redmi 9. Speaking of cameras, let's flick back to the back of the devices. So we said there's a significantly different camera setup. The Redmi 9 has a few sticker cameras, but more importantly, it has a main 13 megapixel sensor paired with a 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, as well as a 5 megapixel macro camera, which is pretty useless in my experience, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. So it has 4 cameras, but realistically the only one you'll be using will be the 13 megapixel main sensor, and it performs really quite well for its price range, but it's nothing to shout out about. There is also an 8 megapixel wide angle camera, which is very, very useful. Whereas the POCO M3 cuts down on things quite a lot. It makes a trade-off. So rather than having a 13 megapixel sensor, you actually have a 48 megapixel sensor, which with software performs very, very well compared to the 13 megapixel camera on the Redmi 9. But there's no ultra-wide camera here, and there's 2 pointless cameras, the 2 megapixel macro sensor and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. So that's it. There is a good main camera though. I do think that it performs better than the Redmi 9 in this space. So that's the cameras. We've gone through the cameras. We will be covering the camera output more in detail in the long-term review of the POCO M3, and you can already see the long-term review of the Redmi 9 on the Tech Travel Geeks YouTube channel. So check that one out if you want to see the actual output of the camera. So, okay, we've covered the main features of hardware and camera. In terms of day-to-day performance, they're both very, very good smartphones. Most people will find them perfectly usable. There won't be any slowdowns or any frustrations. They're both ergonomically really good to use. That's ultimately what most users see. It's not the sticker on the back saying what processor they have or how many cores or how much RAM they have. Most people just use their smartphones and be able to have a good experience. But these two devices have very different setups that allow that pretty seamless experience. Now, the Redmi 9 is running on, in this case, it's running on a MediaTek Helio G80 chipset. It's a slightly older chip design running on the 12 nanometer manufacturing process, whereas the POCO M3 delivers a lot of value with a Snapdragon 662 chipset, which is pretty similar to the one we saw on the Nokia 5.4. So you're getting a lot of value here on both devices in terms of what they can do in terms of processor. And if you look at the £150 price range, both of them have 4 gigabytes of RAM and at least 64 gigabytes of storage. It's worth bearing in mind that the Redmi 9 does have an option to get a 3 gigabytes of RAM model. That is a significant drop down, but for most people it makes no difference whatsoever. So in terms of overall performance, as I said, it's pretty similar on both devices. In terms of gaming, you can comfortably play games like PUBG and Call of Duty Mobile. I have had no issues with that whatsoever. I would actually say that it is a comparable experience on the POCO M3 to some more expensive smartphones. So really good in terms of overall performance. But performance isn't everything. Something that's quite important to people when using their smartphones is battery life. And I'm happy to say both these devices over-deliver in the battery department. That's because inside the body of the Redmi 9 you have a 5000 mAh battery, and the POCO M3 just goes bonkers and gives itself a 6000 mAh battery. So in terms of day-to-day use, I have to caveat with this. I'm in lockdown in the UK. I'm not going out and using the device out and about very much, but I can get between 2 and 3 days use, normal use, from the POCO M3, whereas I can comfortably get 2 days on the Redmi 9. Now, obviously, usage may vary depending on how you're using the device and what you're doing, but both these devices are real battery champions and are definitely ones that I would consider taking with me when traveling because of that really good battery life. Not only that, both these devices also offer a form of fast charging. So they both support 18 watt fast charging. So you can get to, let's put it this way, you can get to pretty much half a battery charge in both devices within an hour of charging. And that really does help if you're at a pinch and need to quickly charge. I'm thinking of scenarios that I hope to be facing again soon, with maybe a low battery and approaching a airline flight gate with the QR code to my flight on the phone, and I need to top up to make sure I have that QR code throughout the boarding process. So that's the sort of situations fast charging is useful in, and it's good to see these two relatively affordable smartphones bring those features to the table. It's a really, really good thing to see. Now, we've talked about cameras, we've talked about hardware, battery life. Both these smartphones, the Xiaomi Redmi 9 and the POCO M3, are really good value for money. But both of them have one major trade-off, which means that you won't be able to do everything you can do with some slightly more affordable smartphones, or some smartphones at the same price range, which offer less in terms of battery life and performance. And that means that both these smartphones do not have NFC in most markets. Now, I have to caveat that with the fact that the Redmi 9 does have NFC in the UK, but that's not the case in all markets. If you're considering buying a Redmi 9, double check and see if it has NFC, because in many markets that may not be a feature. Whereas the POCO M3 just straight up doesn't have NFC, it's not an important thing. That's everything as far as that's concerned. Now, one thing you might want to do, especially if you're traveling, is maybe listen to the local radio. And I'm pleased to tell you that both these devices have FM radio built in. Now, the difference here is that the POCO M3, in my experience, doesn't play radio unless you use the Courage port, that's the 3.5mm audio jack with headphones, because the FM radio uses that as an antenna. Whereas the Redmi 9 has that port, but it doesn't need headphones to be plugged in to use FM radio. So you can play FM radio over the speaker built into the smartphone, just as you would with any other type of media. So a slight difference there in how they're set up and how they work, but both of them offer FM radio, and they don't offer NFC in most markets, apart from some, for example, the UK, where the Redmi 9 does offer NFC. So another key feature to be aware of. Now, obviously, I am a big fan of the Courage port, that's the 3.5mm audio jack that both these smartphones have, but a lot of people now have transitioned to using Bluetooth for their smartphone connectivity to earphones and headphones and speakers. Both these devices, despite being budget smartphones, have Bluetooth 5. Now, Bluetooth 5 is a step up compared to Bluetooth 4 in many ways, but the key one is that you would be able to connect more than one device at once. So say you would be able to connect a smartwatch and your earphones at the same time without having to disconnect one from the other. And this does make a difference once you start getting used to that extra connectivity. For some people, that's a key feature. But for normal use, most users at the moment don't rely on that yet. It shouldn't be a big problem. So, I think we've covered all the main features. The screens are practically identical, the cameras are a little bit different in terms of setups, but there's a trade-off on both smartphones. You get really good smartphones for the price, as long as you're willing to live without NFC in most markets, and you're not really going to be doing long video editing sessions or particularly long gaming sessions at maximum settings. In medium settings, these two smartphones do very, very well, especially for the price category they're in. So what I'm going to do is leave the links in the description to the Tech Travel Geeks content about these two devices, where you can purchase them on Amazon in the UK, SIM-free, and have them delivered. If you have Amazon Prime, it's free next day delivery, as well as to other content that's relevant to these two devices that we have in playlists on the Tech Travel Geeks YouTube channel. Another bit of good news is that both these smartphones are very, very popular, as in there's lots of them about, and there's lots of third-party cases available with them. Now, the POCO M3 came with what our friend Chris over at TechSpert calls a condom case, so it comes with a case in the box. But if you want to purchase an extra one, you can do so. There's plenty available on Amazon and other sites such as AliExpress. We have a review of one we recently released on the Tech Travel Geeks YouTube channel. And the same can be said for the Redmi 9. There's plenty of third-party cases. So check out those videos if you're interested in those as well. It's quite interesting to see how the market's moving in that respect. So we'll wrap up this side-by-side comparison saying that there's no clear winner here. There's no particular extra advantage. If you're in the UK, maybe the NFC on the Redmi 9 may be the decision maker for you, because you'll be able to use the smartphone for things like paying with Google Pay or accessing public transit, such as the tube or load-in buses. And the POCO M3 doesn't have that. But both are great smartphones, have amazing battery life. The POCO M3 does have better battery life, but overall, they're both great options without having to spend a fortune on a smartphone. And if they're anything like our previous experiences with these brands. They're great, durable devices that will last a while. So for now, we're going to wrap up this side-by-side comparison. Check out the links in the description, and thanks for watching.